Good morning. Today is the 10th of Kislev, the 23rd of November, and we are learning Mitzvah Tzitzitis from Derech Mitzvotecha. And yesterday we reached the definition of what a makif and a pnimi is, something that is encompassing and something that is integrated or internal. And now he's going to give us what in Chabad is very common. Because of this, I've told Yaakov a number of times that when you start learning Chabad, the most important thing you need to have is a dictionary. Unfortunately, this dictionary has not been written. You have to write it yourself. And what's this dictionary going to say? It's going to say how these ideas are interpreted in Chasidut. So you have a saying or a verse from Torah or from Nach or from the Mishnah or from the Gemara, and then you have the Hasidic explanation. But there's another side to this dictionary.
What about the two words that are the same and used, interchangeably? You never know what to finally suss out that it's actually the same thing.
What do you mean, like what?
There's certain phrases.
Oh, so that's what I was getting to. Yeah. But there's also another part of this dictionary where there are words that went through evolution or changes from the Tanakh to...
You don't believe in evolution?
Yeah, I do. In human affairs, of course. I just don't believe in the grand scale that they have it in nature, because it doesn't make any mathematical sense. But when you look at the progress of the development, if you don't like the word evolution, the development of a concept, so you see that in different generations they had different names for it, but they mean the same thing. Right. So, for instance, there's a famous, I think Yeres HaKodesh Vav, the sixth epistle in the Tanya, Vayhi David Oseh Shem. And David was making himself a name. And then it's explained that the word name in the Tanakh, which is very common, was later changed to or, to light. Meaning, when I say that something has light, what do I mean? God's infinite light, His encompassing light, His inner light. I mean like a name. I mean like affecting something, showing yourself, being known. A name is to be known, is how you're known. It's how you have a good name, you're known as a good person. In the same way, light is a revelation of yourself. It's how you reveal yourself. It's how you compose yourself, how you show yourself. So this word, Shem, which is quite common in the Tanakh, was later changed by the Zohar into O. And why was it changed? Because name, they felt, was too anthropomorphic. It was too connected to human beings. So they didn't want to say, but we say this, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Leolam V'ed. We don't say Baruch Or Kvod Malchuto. We could have said the same thing. Blessed is His light. Because what do we mean? We mean how God reveals Himself, or the revelation of His kingdom. But in earlier times, they would use the word Shem. Now He's going to tell us, ובחינת החיות המתלבש בפנימיות נקרא אור פנימי. It's a very here. ובחינת החיות. And this life force, you got it? Yeah. And this life force that is enclosed within, meaning it's integrated into the person. We can't imagine for a moment our consciousness leaving us, until it does. But we can't disintegrate it. We can't take it out. Although people try. There's all kinds of things in the East that they try to get rid of the consciousness. Maybe they're successful, maybe not. I don't think they really are. But in any case, for us, what is integrated is integrated. It's inside already. Once I know 1 + 1 = 2, I can't unlearn it. There's no way I can change that in my mind. So that's called integrated light, or Or Pnimi, inner light. But now he tells us, again, in this dictionary, we have this entry that says like this, Uvilshon HaZohar v'Raya Mehemna, and in the language used by the Zohar and by the Raya Mehemna. Raya Mehemna is a book in and of itself. It's a book in and of itself that was included in the Zohar. We don't know the origin of the Raya Mehemna. The Raya Mehemna is a big mystery. Where did it come from? It's Rashbi talking to Moshe Rabbeinu's soul, all of it, and it explains the mitzvos, different commandments. Altogether, I think out of the 613, I think it covers something like 200. And most of those that were relevant after the destruction of the temple, which would fit something that was in Rashbi's time. So in the Zohar and the Raya Mehemna, but again, in the Zohar themselves, the way the Zohar is printed today, these two books are combined. They're one after they're just mixed up together. Everywhere that it's the Raya Mehemna, it says it's Raya Mehemna. Nikra sovev u'memale. The Zohar used a different terminology. It called it sovev, surrounding, or circumventing, or circumspecting, maybe, and memale, and filling. So a lot of times you'll see in Chasidut it says memale kol almin and sovev kol almin. The light that fills all worlds and the light that encompasses all worlds. But it means the same thing as ol pnimi and ol makif. It's exactly the same. Encircling. Thank you. Sovev is like encircling. Okay? But it means exactly the same thing. And this is a very important thing to know when studying, when learning any subject, but especially a subject that's 3,500 years old. You have to keep track of what terminology was used when, and sometimes you have to ask, why did they change the terminology? Why was the terminology changed? Well, what's the reason for it? I don't have a good reason for why Sovev and Memale in the time of the Zohar and the Raya Mehemna was changed to Ol Pnimi and Ol Makif. I don't know why. But they're equivalent. He says they're literally the same thing. Okay. Now, we said there's two chains, let's call them. The Alter Rebbe calls them this actually in the Siddur. There are two chains of creation. There's the creation of the vessel, and there's the creation of the light, or the creation of the, I said last time, matter, or it's not just matter, it's a thing in and of itself, and then there is everything that functions in it, everything that's enclosed within it. Today we have a very good analogy that I think the Alter Rebbe would agree with, that it captures a lot of the same ideas. When you manufacture an iPhone, so there are two parts to it. There's the hardware and the software. There's a lot more. There's firmware and other stuff. But in principle, there's hardware and software. The hardware includes the casing, everything, the glass, all the circuitry, all the chips, everything that goes into it. The software you load later. Well, some of the software is it's in the operating system, but in principle it's loaded. It's not, you don't manufacture it. You just copy it many, many times. Now you see that there's a huge difference between software and hardware. Hardware people have to actually sit, or machines, it doesn't matter. You have to get matter, you have to fabricate it into something. The software you write once, and then you upload it. So the example would be that my consciousness and your consciousness, you're watching me talk, is basically the same. It was uploaded to me, uploaded to you. We did different things with it. Okay? So I have 1 + 1 = 2, and you have 1 + 1 = 2. And I do it with it, whatever I do, and you do with it whatever you do. But in principle...
Some get upgraded software.
Right, some get an upgrade every day, and you should get an upgrade.
From the beginning.
Right, you should get upgraded every single day. Every single day. That's what keeps it alive. So this used to be called, in the time, what did they call software? In the time of the Rambam, for instance, they had a name for it. They didn't call it software. Schalim nivdalim. They called it separate intellect, or defined intellect. What do they mean? Sechel nivdal means a truth about the world. 1 + 1 = 2 is a sechel nivdal. Triangles, any triangle is a sechel nivdal, the concept of a triangle. The statement that all the angles in a triangle sum to 180 if you're on a Euclidean surface, right? If you're on a non-Euclidean surface, they can be much more. There's 360 actually, a non-Euclidean surface. In any case, there are truths about this that are nivdalim, they're separate from the intellect of each individual. They're not dependent on our hardware. They exist anyway. So if you have terrible hardware, and you can't get the fact that you can't understand why the sum of the angles in the triangle is 180, it doesn't change anything in the software. The software is still true. Yeah. It's still a true statement. Your hardware is not up to it. You don't get it. Okay, and if you didn't understand what I just said about non-Euclidean surfaces, which I don't understand either, I can quote it.
But it's
so
true and it's out there.
It's true,
not, yeah.
but so it can be uploaded into me, and it can be not uploaded. So I think this is a good example of what is meant by encompassing light, ol makif, and inner light. The inner light is this software that you can upload, and it can be uploaded everywhere. And it's the same. Everywhere it hits, it's the same. Now, there's a little bit of a problem there because we're not just logical. We're not just logical beings. We're not just talking about uploading software, which is, how shall I say, it's not just digits. It's not cold knowledge. There's another aspect which we call inner light, which is much deeper, which comes from the heart, which is the emotions. Now, in principle, the emotions are also the same by every person. And you could say that there are just different iterations of them, meaning, I love my wife, you love your wife. But the love is the same. So that's in principle. So in some ways, it's like software. It's like the same thing. But really, it's not. Really, it's much more complex than that. So let's just leave it that this is a good analogy, at least for what we mean by the hardware. When we say that you need a separate chain of creation for the vessel, for the thing in and of itself, we mean the same way that iPhones are created in Foxconn in China, and they require actual hands, whether they be human hands or robotic hands, whatever, to put together the pieces, and that is separate from what afterwards will be loaded as software. And that will come from what we call integrated light. Okay? So the matter, the physical, the vessel, that comes from one chain, and the other one comes from another. So he says here now, this is his question.
An example of that in the Chumash. Is a classic example.
Yeah.
The Betzalas with the Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah.
First you build the house, and then you put the pieces inside.
Okay.
He told him to build the ark. He says, well, first you build it.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but
and then there's the kalim which go inside.
The only problem I have with that is that everything has to be manufactured there. It's just a question of what comes first. You're right that would also be called.
The Dibros came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Okay, you're right 100% that what's inside the tabernacle is like the Opnimi, and what's and the structure of the tabernacle, that's like Ol Makif. 100%. This is written many, many times, but it doesn't capture what I'm trying to capture, which is that matter, that the physical is manufactured in a different way. It's a separate chain of creation.
But as you're speaking, it's exactly what I think.
Okay, so
to me, it fits.
100%. I didn't say it doesn't fit. It just doesn't stress what I want. So anyway, so his question now is, now we can understand the question. How can there be something from something when it is not a process of one thing enclosing in the other? And he says, I'll give you an example, what I mean by this question. In other words, what he's asking is, how can the iPhone itself be manufactured? Where did the original materials come from if they weren't a succession of the light, like we said yesterday, thickening or something? How can the Ol Makif create something when there's a gap? There's no connection, is what you're saying. So he'll give us an example now. הנה המחשבה גילויה במוח דווקא ולא בשאר האיברים, לפי שכלי המוח הרכבתה מעין ודוגמת השכל. It says, thought can only reveal itself in our brain. It can't reveal itself in any other organ. You can't think with your hand. Okay? There's no thinking. Doesn't think. What's 1 + 1 = 2? Doesn't know. So, you stupid. What do you don't know? You don't know? No, because I think here. That's where I think. Why is this? Because there is a connection. The organ is suited to this type of revelation of God's light. Meaning thinking. We think that we think. No. You're thinking because Hashem has thought. Hashem gave you some of that thought. God gave you some of that power of thought. So that, where did it go? It can only go into the vessel, into the organ that is suited for that type of revelation of godliness called thought. Here he uses the foot. He says the foot, so it's harder to get to. Doesn't know what 1 + 1 = 2. ולכך אם יקהו בראשו תתבלבל המחשבה. This is just what we learned in the previous mimer from the Rashab. So if I hit you on your head, give you a strong knock, like really punch you, so you'll be dizzy for a while. You won't be able to think. Why? Because in the end, that's where the thinking goes on. It's not that that's thinking really, it's just that that light is now being revealed through the brain. And if the brain is now in a concussion, it can't think. But if I break your foot, you don't stop thinking. There's no reason to. Yeah, but that's not because you can't think. I'll give you a painkiller and you can think right away. Because it's not so connected to the foot. But we see also the opposite. But we see that there is some form of thinking in the foot, but we just can't call it thinking. It's something else. This is exactly what we talked about in the Rashab. והמופת לזה שמיד שעולה במחשבתו שיפשוט רגלו, הנה תכף תתפשט הרגל בלי איחור ועיכוב כלל לכלל. That's what we talked about last time. That when I decide to stretch my legs, they immediately stretch. So how did my thinking about stretching my legs reach my foot? So there must be some connection. Okay, here he's not talking, they knew about the nervous system already when he's writing this. He's not talking about the physical, how this actually works. That's not the question. The question is, why is it that this organ, let's call it the nervous system, is a big organ? Why does that carry thought? How does that even carry thought? Why does that translate? Why is it able to contain the light of thought, at least at a minuscule level? So you would say it's only mechanical. It's not just mechanical. It's more than that. In some ways, it's more than that. But in any case, it seems instantaneous. So what he's saying is somehow the nervous system, again, it's not, forget about the nervous system, that's the organ, but somehow the foot is able to instantaneously perform the action. So he says there must be some form of thought in the foot itself. Otherwise it wouldn't be able to receive this transmission. Let's say I'm even transmitting. So what's on the other side receiving it? Something must be receiving it. There's just a new discovery in the last few months of ganglia in the gut.
What?
Yeah, it's mouthful for me too. What does it mean? You know what ganglia are. What are ganglia? Neurons. Neurons. They're neurons.
Okay.
We always knew that the neurons, that the people even called it like this, the gut is a second brain. They even said this. What they meant was that the gut is wired from conception. It's the same part that creates the brain becomes the gut. It's a very interesting thing about why this is. But what they just discovered is that it's independent. It doesn't transmit back to the brain. It actually works entirely by itself. This is it.
Is that why I'm always so hungry?
Yeah, because it's got nothing to do with your brain.
So it's autonomous.
It's autonomous. It's an autonomous nervous system.
There's an autonomous nervous system.
Not so much. The autonomous nervous system is still dependent on the brain.
Okay.
Here we're saying it's completely autonomous. It's thinking by itself.
That's like impossible.
That's why it's so complex. But in any case, I mean, what he's saying here is something that if you would have said 50 years ago, they would have told you nonsense. But he's saying something simple. If there's somebody receiving it on the other end, there must be some form of thought there. There must be. What kind of thought? It's not the thinking of 1 + 1 = 2, because that I know my foot doesn't know how to do that.
But that discovery negates that.
Right. It says these things that are receiving on the other end, they're independent. Now, I don't know if it's in the foot that way, but in the gut, it was just discovered in the last few months that it is independent of the brain, as far as I could understand from the article that I read. So he said there must be something, again, he's not talking about the nerves. He doesn't care. He's not talking about what is the vehicle, the vessel through which this is happening. He's just saying there is a form of thought there in the foot.
This is like this discovery, correct? I mean,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that this discovery could be an example of the vessel that does this.
Okay.
And that's why it doesn't take time. But the truth is, both views are correct. The begilui en ma'machshava klal baregel. when I look at it at face value, the foot does not think, period. There's no thought there. Ela b'moach, it all happens in the brain. Aval be'elem, but in the concealed realm, yeshna b'regel mo b'moach mamash b'shaveh. It exists also in the foot, just like it does in the brain. Again, the foot is not a vessel to reveal all of thought. So all it can reveal, again, what's the point here? We'll sum up with this. Science thinks about it from the bottom up. So science says the more complex something becomes, the more it can think. So even if they grant me that what I just said is true, the gut has a brain, let's say the foot has a mini brain, say, but these brains, they're nothing. They're nothing. You can't call them thought. It's not thought. Chasidus and Kabbalah look at it from a different perspective. They look at it from above to below. They say the power of thought itself is such a great innovation in reality, because we don't see tables thinking. It's such a great innovation that it must be coming from above. It's all a revelation of God's light. That's what we mean by God. Part of God is thinking. If a person does not think, he's not godly. You can't say he is. Well, if he mamish can't think at all, he's dead. But if he's not advancing every day, the Rebbe used to say, he's not a person. He's not a human being. What are you doing? Because that is God's light that comes down, that affects reality and is enclosed wherever it can be enclosed. So in the brain, it's enclosed at such a level that you can think quantum mechanics. Yeah. At the foot, it's enclosed at such a level, again, it's concealed, you can't see it normally, but it's there. And it has to be thinking. So this is really, we sort of, when we were going over the Rashab's previous mimer that we learned, I sort of skipped over this whole explanation. I left it sort of vague. Here it's much clearer. That we're talking about concealment and revelation. Put it another way, what would happen if I were able to grow a second brain in the foot? I don't know why. Someday we'll come to a conclusion that the best way to help people who had a concussion is to grow more brain cells in the foot. I don't know why. That's what they'll come to conclusion. It's the best place to do it. So what will happen to those brain cells? Because they're in the foot, they won't think? He says, no. The moment you create the vessel, the light is there already. And the light will penetrate, it will enclose into this vessel, and it will begin to think. There's another example of this. What happens when you clone a person? This is a thought experiment I've been thinking about for years. If you clone a person, is it the same person or not the same person?
Theoretically, it's the same person.
Right. The question would be in Kabbalah and Chasidus, does it pull down, or in this case, reveal the same thought, the same soul? That's what we would call it. Meaning, would two physical individuals share the same soul, the same thoughts? Meaning, if I could really clone you, and you were I had another copy of myself, and let's say for a few minutes we're exactly the same, because we haven't eaten yet, we haven't drunk nothing. Everything is exactly the same. Right. Yeah, but they quickly diverge.
Okay.
But I'm saying it's something that would be mamash a clone. So, would we have the same thoughts at the same moment, in the beginning at least? And that would show that we're just revealing something higher. It just happens to be that when two iPhones act the same way with the same iOS, with the same operating system. They have to, because they're built in such a way that they draw down, as it were, they reveal the same software. The same. Could that also be, if I had an identical clone of myself, we would both be revealing at the same time the same thoughts from God? Okay. So that, again, the key here is to understand that we're thinking about God as being thought. He's much more than that, but he's at least thought. And then this thought is revealed through the vessels that he created. And some of these vessels are us.
No talking.
No talking. Why? Who said?
There was none. Mincha, there was no.
Is it one of the days?
No, Mincha, there was no.